Welcome back to the Beyond Johns podcast, everybody. We've got a very special episode. Last week, we had me on the podcast. I was the focus because of a new job that I got back in April, and I've been working for Pisces Oceans ever since. Bit of a dream job. Want to talk about that a little bit here on the podcast because, it's what we do. We talk about jobs. We talk about updates in our lives, especially between Dave and I. And Dave, we're going to be focusing on you today because you just got back from a trip. I think it was about 5 weeks long, where you went to South Africa and you also went to Sri Lanka for Sharks International. So we're going to run down sort of the significance of that trip. And you even got to dive in the Maldives, which is great. Off season. However, as you will say, pretty terrific diving. So a lot of fun. I can't wait to get into it all. First of all, welcome back. How are you feeling?
A little wrecked, but after going to 5 weeks, 5 countries, 3 continents, and I don't even want to think about how many hours I spent on a flight or in airports. It's just kind of just want to blot that out of my mind. But it was an awesome trip. I can't. Well, I'll tell you about. I can't say enough, but I'm going to talk, so I'll probably say more than you.
You'll say enough.
I'll say it all there. So,
right on. So let's just break it down, Dave. You went 5 weeks away. Why don't you just talk about purpose of the trip, where you went first, where you went last, and then we'll kind of dive into. We'll start off with South Africa, and then we'll dive into Sharks International.
Well, I started off the trip. I went to South Africa for a couple of weeks, and the South Africa trip was part of a Save Our Seas Foundation and an ocean census grants that I had in partnership with the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. And I've been working I've been working in South Africa, obviously, for a long time, for 40 years. This is my 40th year, by the way, since I first arrived in South Africa. So
amazing,
it's been turned into a bit of a journey already for the year.
Yeah.
But it's kind of neat going back to the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, which used to be called the J.L.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology when I was a student back in the day. Okay. And those that don't know, J.L.B. Smith was the one who described the coelacanth back in 1938, the old forelegs, and it was a fish that was thought to be extinct for 70 million years, and specimen turned up off East London, South Africa, and Marjorie Courtney Latimer got a hold of the fish from the fishing captain and contacted J.L.B. Smith, who initially didn't know what the hell they had, and but they eventually figured out it was a coelacanth. And such began a journey that took them till the 1950s. Was interrupted with World War II before they found another specimen off the Comores. So anyway, that's just a little bit of the history there of SIAB, which is the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. The name had been changed. And just a little footnote, J.L.B. Smith's wife, Margaret Smith, when I first went to South Africa in 1986, she was still alive, and I actually got to know her. And I house sat for her and her sister. They were in their 70s at the time, and her sister was a retired vaudeville performer. And I'm sure the young people are going, "What's a vaudeville performer?" So
I don't even know that.
Okay, so basically you get up on stage and you entertain people. It'd be like going to a concert
like an
now. It's comedy, it's entertainment,
everything.
It's all kinds of different stuff. People, because back in the day you didn't have videos and movies and stuff, so people would just go there and they'd get up on stage and entertain people.
Bit of a talent show, if you will.
Yeah, sort of and if you think of some of the old people, you may know the names like Bob Hope and some of these people. Yeah. They started out as vaudeville performers, Charlie Chaplin, these guys. And so anyway, go look it up. But anyway, so Margaret and her sister had a home, and they were well into their 70s, and they used to have students would house sit. They had a cottage that would stay there in case there was any health problems with them, having a younger person there. And so I ended up house sat there for a little bit for them. And it was kind of cool. I was a young guy in my 20s, and Margaret and her sister Flora would come over literally with tea and crumpets every night around 7:00, when she'd share some stories. And she was a pretty amazing woman, the stuff she was doing back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. As a young woman in South Africa, they would venture to Mozambique or Tanzania or Angola, Namibia to go and collecting. And JLB was about 20, at least 20 years older than her, and so he wasn't in great health. So she actually had to do a lot of the diving and swimming and stuff. And she was actually a very accomplished swimmer when she was a young woman, and so she used to go out and collect the fish. And she'd tell me these stories about they'd go out on these beautiful coral reefs in like Mozambique, and this is how they used to collect fish. So young people don't be horrified, but they used to dynamite the reefs, and then the dead fish would float up. At the time,
they knew any better.
It was all they had to do, because I mean there was no luxuries at all. I mean, you were out there camping. And so she told me the story. She'd go diving around. She says, yeah, Dave, all these sharks would start showing up and swimming around, and be looking at JLB going like, is it okay for me to be in the water? And she goes, oh, don't worry. Sharks don't bother people. And she goes, and she'd look at me like, just perfect, without skipping a beat, and go like, what do you think, Dave? Should I have been worried? And I said, well, my attitude is if they're bigger than me, I'd get the hell out of the water. But, you made it. So
was she a scientist as well?
Yeah, she was an illustrator. If you look at
cool.
Yeah, she was actually, her background was in chemistry. And actually JLB Smith was a chemist as well. And she was,
interesting.
The backstory, she was a chemistry student of his, is how they met. So back in the day. So, but yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. Sometime I'll definitely maybe come on sometime and just share more of that whole backstory. I've shared parts of it before, but it's kind of interesting, just a bit of the history there. Yeah. And then, so anyway, I've kept my relationship with now SciAb for all these years, and I go back as often as I can, because I'm a research associate there, and continue working in the collection. And
so before you go on, what does it mean to be a research associate? Is that like an adjunct professor in a way?
Yeah, it's like an adjunct. It basically means you have an affiliation, but they don't pay you anything.
Right.
So
right.
Which seems to be
when you go there, you can do some experiments and things like that.
Right. I go into the fish collection there. They're basically like one of the two main national fish collections in the country. That and, and what used to be the South African Museum, or now it's called the Zico in Cape Town. Those are the two main facilities, and they have. It's an amazing place. They got just historical stuff, archival stuff, research stuff there that just from over 150 years ago, just it was collected back in the day, and a lot of the South Africa's collection, their important type species are actually either at SciAb or in Cape Town. So it's kind of a good place to go to do research, and they're connected with the university, with Rhodes University. I think they're autonomous, but they have a lot of students that go to Rhodes that are in the Department of Ichthyology and Fisheries Sciences, which is where I was technically affiliated with. But then my professor was connected. He worked for SciAb or JLB at the time, and so I've had this affiliation. I don't get paid, but I get some accommodation made when I go down there. And it's kind of neat now because I go down there. I still do research, very active, but I'm kind of training a lot of the young South Africans and other young people from East Africa, kind of training them in chondrichthyan taxonomy and systematics. And so which is, it's not obviously it's a very small field, and not a lot of people go into it, but right now I'm really the main person still there doing that type of research. And so it's kind of fun working with the young people and training them that, and they say thanks. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, what's the benefit like for someone now to become like a taxonomist in the way that you are? Like, is like from a career standpoint, like obviously you've had an illustrious career where you've been able to discover and describe over 50 species. You've traveled all over the world. You have all these these affiliations. If someone was building a career right now, like listening to this, we know there's a lot of young people who are listening to this because you met them at Sharks International, and they love the podcast, which we appreciate. But if they're listening to this and they're trying to find their avenue into sharks, like just shark science in general, would you recommend people fall within this category? Is it like a one that not that necessarily like pays off like a crazy amount, but something that somebody can actually have a career in these days?
It's really tough because just nobody wants to. There's a lot of room in this field for this type of research because nobody's doing it. So it's a wide open field, and it's one of these areas that you could go into. You could make a name for yourself pretty easily, I say, well, I don't want to say easily. With a lot of work, you can make a name for yourself in this field because there's not many people, younger people coming up in the field. There's a couple,
Right.
but there's really not many. There's not a lot of positions available. If you're a South African, you almost have to get on with like a museum, whether it's SIAB or the ZICO or the Oceanographic Research Institute in Durban. There's a few places you can get in there, and the chances are, like if you listen to the podcast, I didn't start out as a taxonomist. I was a marine ecologist was my background.
Right.
And most of it I was doing that. But in my case, Leonard Campagno and other people I knew, but mainly Campagno, they were like huge names in taxonomy. And in Leonard's case, he had to basically leave California's, native state, San Francisco, go to South Africa for a job back in the 80s. And he essentially stayed there the rest of his life. And worked in South Africa. And he was fortunate. He got a position first at SIAB and then later at ZICO or the South African Museum in Cape Town. But it was a lot of work, and he was, Leonard was, like I said, one of the best all time in the field.
Right.
So you can do it. It's a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice. But I think I tell students is it's a good skill to know, to get, because you can it's one of those tools that can make you invaluable if you have other skills to bring it. Quantitative skills, genetics, which is a big field now. If you have other skills to complement this, that you can get a job. It may not be as a taxonomist, but it might be as a fishery biologist or some other type of position adjacent to the field. Then your expertise can help out, and that's kind of where I kind of came in was. After Leonard kind of moved off the field, I kind of filled a big void there, and I kind of moved from doing a lot of the field stuff into doing more of the taxonomic work. I've kind of moved in to fill that field on and stuff, and that's kind of that's the way you could look at it. But you can make a name for yourself in the field basically because there's just not a lot of people doing it, and the similarity I use is, you can go do white sharks like everybody else does, and you'll be one of 1,000 people out there, but you're not going to stand out. Maybe after years, decades of work, you'll get there. But if you do some good solid research in the chondrichthyan taxonomy, you can get yourself on the map pretty quickly. So
and you become pretty effective within a lab or something,
right?
Like if you have those identification skills and so forth.
And a lot of the students I'm working with now, they're and we'll talk about a few of them, and some of them we'll have on the podcast, and one of them has been on the podcast. But if you develop quantitative skills and or genetic skills, then you start to make yourself valuable because you have multiple skills, and that's what I always tell students: skills are what's going to get you there.
Agreed.
And so and it's kind of neat too because some of the young people I'm working with, and I'll mention some of the names like Rachel Aitchison, who was one of my former MSc students. She's now in Nick Dulvey's.
She's been on the podcast.
Yep, she's been on the podcast. She's in Nick Dulvey's lab. Michaela Van Staten, who's also been on the podcast. She's now a postdoc at University of Stellenbosch in Aletta van der Merwe's lab, who Aletta's been on the podcast as well. And she's doing a postdoc, and she has the genetic skills, and she's learning the taxonomic stuff. And Rachel has quantitative skills she's learning. And also another young postdoc who's very, very dynamic is Yanela Sito, who's a postdoc at SIAB. In her case, she did some taxonomy in freshwater fishes, and now she's come over to the light in terms of working with chondrichthyans. And again, she has genetic skills. And so those are just a few of the young students I'm working with now, kind of training them up, but all of them have other skills that'll really help them in the taxonomic world. Now, taxonomy stuff could work out at some point where somebody needs someone that can identify sharks and rays, and that's a skill for him. So, we're gonna have all three of them back on the podcast. Yanela hasn't been on the podcast yet, but we'll definitely have the other two back on as well. So those are just a few of the core people I've been working with. I ran some when I was at SIAB. I was running some identification workshops, which are kind of fun.
Yeah,
and I did one for a lot of the young people at SIAB. that working on other areas, have other areas where there's freshwater fishes or bony fishes and stuff, just to give them some basics, to train them some basics in chondrichthyan identification. And so that was kind of a cool thing. I enjoy doing that type of stuff, so it was really good. I had one day I had a bunch of young grade school, I think equivalent about third or fourth grade. I think they were 7, 8 years old. From one of the girls' school there came by. One of the teachers, the former, had been at SciAb, brought up and did her PhD there, and brought them by. And so we spent about a half hour just showing them, talking about sharks and stuff like that. So, most of them are not going to none of them are probably going to end up doing sharks, but to kind of be able to inspire some young people like that, especially young kids like that, to see like, wow, there's opportunities there to pursue. And you can see some of these posts I have up on my Instagram account. If you're on, follow me at Lost Shark Guy on Instagram. I have some of those posts up there. Yeah, it was really cool. And one of the main projects I'm working with is with the Food and Agriculture Organization and the Nansen research vessel Nansen, which is doing research cruises off the east coast of Africa. They did it recently in 2023 and 2025. And the chondrichthyans come to SciAb for eventual deposition. But we've been working on describing, we've probably got about 12 or 15 new species now that we're working on there. And again, I'm kind of working with the students, some of the postdocs and students I just mentioned, Rachel, Michaela, and Yanela, as well as some others, on identifying and confirming if these things are new species. And that could include some revisionary work on the guitarfishes and stuff, which would be, when they're done, there'll be some pretty impressive publications for them to have in their resume and their CV. And so that's pretty cool. And again, the other side thing is young people think, well, has everything been discovered? And here we've got a dozen or more new species. And just want to mention again, the Ocean Census and Save Our Seas have been really great about helping support this type of research over the last several years of my certainly career. And then of course SciAb's been really good as well. So it's kind of a fun. We spent a couple weeks and it was pretty full on. I mean, I worked like 15, 16 days straight right through the weekends because I knew I only had a certain amount of time there. And so we were and the kids were there just pounding away and stuff. And I had to get stuff together because I was giving a talk at Sharks International, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. And so I had to get stuff together for that, get ready for that talk. And but yeah, it's an ongoing project. I hoping to go back in early next year and continue the journey with the young people. And to say at this point in my career, it's kind of cool seeing the young people kind of coming up and doing some stuff. So that was kind of the SciAb trip, and as I mentioned, it was 40 years ago I first arrived in South Africa, and it's funny because most of these kids are like 10 years younger than are either aren't 30 or they're just barely 30 now. So it's kind of like thinking.
Well, let me ask you this though, you've had this relationship for 40 years, but how did you're living in California for most of that time, other than when you lived in South Africa. But when, coming back, you've probably lived in California now since you've been back, since the early 90s? Yeah,
I've been there for about 35 years or so,
35 years, yeah. So, especially as the internet got on, probably got a little easier to keep in touch with people and so forth. But over the years, how do you maintain that type of relationship with such a geographic distance?
Well, I'll say the internet did help a bit. Part of it, I had developed a lot of good friendships at the time, and it's kind of interesting because you see these people I went to grad school with, and some of them are like director of the lab, director at the Oceanographic Research Institute, Larry Allerman, a lot of the research people there at the Oceanographic Research Institute, some at SciAb. They got jobs here, or they got jobs at some of the other universities or institutions there. And so this is an important point for young people. I made these relationships when we're all grad students, and we just kept those friendships going over the years. And as they moved into position, initially starting positions, and then moved up through their careers and became more senior researchers there, that kind of enabled me to eventually get on as a research associate. And of course,
Gotcha.
the number of the people there that were directors, senior people when I was a student were still there. I became a research associate at SciAb in 2009. So it was about 18 years or so after I left. And I wasn't even really thinking about it. And when I was down there, had been going back already doing some research there. And someone asked me, one of my friends there, I think it was Paul Cowley, asked me if I wanted to be a research associate. And I said, sure.
That's awesome.
And there's some.
And then so to satisfy something like that, do you have to do a certain, like, do you publish papers with people?
Yeah.
And then when you do visit, you do these workshops and stuff like that? Is that how?
Yeah, I publish. I use the SciAb in addition to my Moss Landing San Jose State address. I use SciAb as an address, and they get it gives them recognition, publicity, and they also get research funds to fund, because they're a national institution. They get research funds from the government for publications and notoriety. And so, as a research associate, when I publish and I use their address, that gets they get funding. They basically get funding from the government for publications.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the more prolific researchers there in terms of publications. And so when I go down there, they help defray a lot of my costs.
Gotcha.
So it works out for everybody. And then between that and then with these other grants, Save Our Seas and Ocean Senses, it kind of like between the three of those, it kind of all basically, as long as they cover my expenses, I'm not making any money on it, but as long as they cover all my expenses, I get a trip to South Africa, do some research, get to visit with friends, and make new acquaintances and new friendships down there. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's been. Yeah. It's one of those things that, Andrew, I've talked about, is like you just sort of figure it out as you go along. I didn't have any grand planned. I couldn't even have told you when I started out that I was going to be spending as much time there. I'm glad I did, but I couldn't have told you that 35 years ago. I really didn't know where I was going at that point in time in my career.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's so cool.
So
you spent 2 weeks there?
Yeah, I was there basically like full on for like 15 days, and I went
15 days.
Yeah, I worked right through the weekends. I had people coming and going. I had the young people I mentioned. I had another colleague of mine, Rob Leslie, who's retired from sea fisheries. I knew Rob back in the day when I was a student there, and he was one of the fishery biologists I went out on some cruises with. So we just, so he was there. So I had people coming and going the whole time I was there, literally. And
I'm sure. Cause that's the fun part though, right? When you go back, it's busy, but that's the fun part. Like, while you're working there, and then after you have some dinner, have some drinks with some folks that you haven't seen in a while, catch up, see what they're up to, see how things have changed. Like, did you find not only the lab, but just like the area that you were in, has that changed over the years, I assume, since you've been there?
Yeah, it's a little different from what it's for good and bad. A lot of the infrastructure is kind of fallen apart there in Grahamstown than from when I was there. But it's kind of like going on all over the country right now, just some of that stuff going on. But it's the best part of the whole thing is just the friendships I've had over the time. And now it's like most of the people I knew there are now retiring, which is scary as shit to me, because I have no intention of retiring. What am I going to do? Retire and travel? And I travel now, and so get my stuff covered.
Exactly.
So, but it's still good. I see a lot of my friends when I'm down there, and a lot of them I say retiring, but a lot of them they retire and they do consulting work, so they're kind of still active in the field. They're not, because I'm not that old. We're only in our 60s, for crying out loud. It's not that old. And,
I also think there's this I can't see myself. I'll see myself retiring at some point from a job, but I can't see myself turning off the curiosity of asking questions. And I wonder if I could just do this, or, you know what I mean? As a marine biologist, I feel like it's different. If I worked at like a company that I worked at before, like I could see myself retiring. I'd never do that thing again.
Yeah.
But I think for marine biology and shark science, it's a little different in a way, like the mindset, right? When you get towards that age, you might get tired of something, and maybe if you're a director of something, maybe you retire from that. But I feel like the science brain just never really shuts off, and you might, mentor some students, or you might just work on a paper together, or probably you'll probably catch up on a lot of stuff that you haven't published on and you want to publish on, and especially a lot of these species discoveries.
I mean, some of the stuff is just, I mean, there's some stuff I know I'll never get to, and I just pass off to younger people. They might get to it. And then there's newer stuff because the new stuff keeps coming up. And, it's just, I think a thing, and I've talked about this before in the podcast, is that, I kind of got into new things, kind of reinventing myself a little bit, because pretty much most of my career, I was pretty much just, hardcore, like doing research. The social media was non-existent, doing a lot of outreach stuff. I mean, honestly, back when I was coming up, a lot of the people, my professors and stuff, kind of shied away from doing any kind of outreach or science communication. The one guy who was an exception to that, I was fortunate to have, and I was very fortunate. Sometimes I'll have to talk about a lot of these people a little more detailed. John McCosker, who was the director of the Steinhardt Aquarium and later the California Academy of Sciences, he was a top-notch scientist, really good. Went to Scripps Institute of Oceanography, top-notch. He did fish taxonomy, but he was doing science communication back when it wasn't even a thing. They didn't even call it science communication. It was just, but he was very good at
communication,
reaching out and connecting with the public. And he was the first person, and still probably the best person I ever knew at that level of top scientist, where he could take a complicated topic and break it down to a simple thing that the average guy in the street would understand. And that's a thing in the field, is that a lot of the people, scientists, they don't know how to communicate with the average person. There's too much scientific jargon. And you know this because you've kind of spanned both sides of the field, so you probably understand this better than most. But he was one of the few people at the time. He was a pioneer in that area of the field, because generally doing the science communication he was doing at the time was like generally not well thought of. Even though I kind of understood. I thought what John was doing was we should be doing more communicating with the public, because if you can't, and you need to explain it in a situation in a context the average person can understand. If you're throwing around a lot of big words, they're just people are just they might say, "Wow, you're really enthusiastic," but I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, true. True.
And so, of course, with the internet and with social media now, that's completely changed the game. And actually, I'll talk a little bit more about this in regards to the Shark International conference. But so I kind of came up in an era that kind of straddled both sides of this. And now at this point in my career, and again, the young people, it's hard to convey this to, but when you get older, later in your career, always good to reinvent yourself. Like I never could have imagined, 10, 15 years before I met you, doing this kind of, a podcast was like unheard of. I just never thought about it. And I blame all that on you, buddy. But
now you're addicted.
Oh yeah, I love it. Yeah. Well, I kind of got into enjoying podcasts a little bit, but you were the first one ever invited me on to podcast. I'd never done one. And I really enjoy this long form like we do with the Beyond Jaws podcast. And of course that led to this now. And then of course now we're doing these YouTube documentary series, Searching for Lost Sharks, documenting some of these journeys I've been on the last few years, thanks to the Save Our Seas Foundation. And I'm trying to tell a story about how, about these different things. I try to add a little more, context to some of these discoveries. The recent one, I'll give a plug for on the river shark story. If you have a chance to catch it, it's only like 12, 13 minutes, but I'd encourage people to go to Lost Shark Guy on YouTube and watch it. But it really, that whole journey laid the foundation for shark conservation, because there was no shark conservation. Again, it's hard for people to understand that. You're probably in that tweener area. You're at your age, Andrew. It was kind of sort of starting out when you came of age, but it was really, there was no field for it. And it just, it really, that whole thing, and again, brilliance of like Leonard Campagno's, he was thinking about this and talking about sharks that had disappeared. And I talk about this in that video episode about how there was nothing going on. And coincidentally, parallel to my journey in shark conservation, Sarah Fowler in England who was working, who's also doing marine conservation, started asking questions about shark conservation. And Sarah and I are about the same age. And again, without having social media or any kind of internet, we were just on these parallel paths that kind of eventually crossed, later on in the 90s. But in my case, Leonard, everybody's talking about like sharks in terms of fisheries. Nobody's talking about sharks having disappeared at that time. And the river shark was one of the species that Leonard really thought the Ganges shark may have gone extinct back in the 80s because nobody had seen one for like 150 or 60 years at the time.
I mean, is this the same river shark that we just released an episode on not too long ago that people can go check out at Lost Shark Guy on the YouTube channel?
Yep.
Just want to mention that.
Lost Shark Guy on YouTube, and Andrew and Denise Sotomayor. I wanted to again mention her. She's been on the podcast. She did the filming She did the filming on there, and you did the did the editing for the stuff, and I put together the story, and I tried to put more of a story to it than just like, here's river sharks. Tell a little more of a story, and of course feature a lot of young people in the series. Julia Constance is one of the featured people in the current one, but I've also had Adriana Pistana, Naya Simone, and the thing. So there's a number of young people there. I've got Christelle, Madagascar, Piero. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of people in there, young people kind of featured. So you get a bit of a crossover as well in some of the stuff. But definitely check it out. But it's an interesting story in the whole journey as far as how that took place. But again, coming back to the main thing I mentioned, as you get along in your career, never be afraid to reinvent yourself, because that's gonna, because you keep young, you challenge. The more when you're challenging yourself, you're always wanting to do something new, something different, rather than just getting stale doing the same old thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like it's for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, so after the great time I had there at SIAB, and it was a good time. I had a really good time seeing friends and everything. I went on to Sri Lanka, to Colombo, for the 5th Sharks International.
And I think that's your second visit to Sri Lanka?
Yes, that was the second one. My first one was about 8 years ago now.
Yeah.
And Daniel Fernando, who was just in the podcast, and I'm going to try and repost a lot of these things, but go out and check out Daniel Fernando on there. I spent a couple weeks with him and his team in Sri Lanka about 8 years ago. Had a phenomenal time. That was an epic. I
remember you texting me from there. You were like, you're like, this is amazing. We just saw a shark. Like we just saw a shark we've been looking for.
It's one of those. I tell the story. I've told it I know many times, but this before I went, I got a email from someone. In fact, it was a guy named Rex De Silva, who I'd corresponded with for going back to the mid '80s, and I finally met him in 2018. First time we actually met in person. And Rex actually showed up at Sharks International. And here's a story. Here's a story. I don't think I've told to share this one with you yet. When I got to Sharks International, I met up with a friend of mine I'd never met in person, with Asha DeVos.
Yes,
who's known for her
phenomenal person.
What a dynamo! We'll have to have her on. I know she's kind of a whale person, but we'll have her on the podcast. I don't care. We'll have her on the podcast. She's
a marine conservation person.
Yeah,
like all in all together, and she's just a very fun interview. She's so much fun.
Have you had her on? Have you had her on your podcast?
I've had her on the podcast. I've actually interviewed her a few times. She's actually been out. She does a lot of. She gets flown around the world a lot to do a lot of talks, and she's I think you were about to say, she discovered one of the only non-migrating blue whale populations that was in the Indian Ocean just south of Sri Lanka, and she did a study on that. And just to kind of give a brief description of what she did, like during that time, Sri Lanka has one of the largest ports in the world, if not the largest. I'm not sure if it's the largest anymore, but it's huge, and she rallied the government, like went there every day to, to get them to change the way, like the basically the shipping lanes to go in, so that they didn't have any incidences against the blue whales, which sounds kind of normal enough. If you go and you lobby the government in the U.S. or Canada and stuff like that, it's normal that people would do that to change shipping lanes, and organizations would back her. But in Sri Lanka, it's a little bit different. There's obviously a gender bias there, as she's a woman doing science, and she's had over that time she had a lot of threats to her life and endangerment and things like that, and she's continued to persevere. But not only that, she got it to change, by the way, and then she's just been an amazing person. Like she's been a mentor to people in developing countries who also want to do what she does.
Yeah.
She started her own organization. She's just like, it just doesn't stop with her.
Right.
She's extremely busy, but she came out to Toronto a few times, and every time she comes, I try to link up with her because she's just so much fun. Like she's a marathon runner.
Yep.
She's just a fun person to get to know and just to learn off of. Like she's younger than I am, but she's just such a cool person to know.
Yeah.
As you probably.
Oh yeah. Well, like I said, I'd known her a little bit over the years, and I'd identified some deep sea sharks she had some videos of in the past, but I never met her before because I one time there before. It was Daniel Fernandez, and I've known Daniel since probably like 2012, 13, early on when he first got going. So I've known Dan. And Daniel was more in the manta ray sharks, Guy Stevens, and so who I've known a long time as well. So I kind of got to know them. So I've known them more, but I got to know Asha a few years ago. We've corresponded, and so I was coming to since I was coming there, we got together. Well, the story I was starting to tell was this guy named Rex De Silva, who's Rex is up in his mid 80s now, but I got to know Rex through correspondence back in the 80s. Met him the first time when I went there in 2018. Well, Rex came down and he just had a heart attack like 5 weeks earlier, and he still came to the conference because he just wanted to, see me in person, catch up with him. Well, turns out that Rex has known Asha since she was about 6 years old because he was her karate coach.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I realize Sri Lanka is a small place, but
still, though, there's lots of people that live there. Like that doesn't always happen.
No, I mean, he wasn't like a Marine. Rex is more of a self-taught naturalist. He doesn't have the academic background a lot of people do. But he got one of the things he did besides, keeping track of sharks there was he was a karate instructor, and he'd been training Asha since she was like 6. So I thought awesome. That was just a hilarious story. So there's a picture you'll see on the thing of Asha and Rex and I. And as I had Rex, as I started to tell the story, he sent me a picture of this weird shark a friend had sent him from this deep water port on the east coast of Sri Lanka. And when I went there with Daniel, turned out I showed some fishermen a picture of this thing and the guys kind of shook their head and they said, "I'll come back tomorrow." And I came back the next day and they caught one, and I was like running up and down the beach doing fist pumps. I was one of the most amazing discoveries ever. Awesome. And it was a new species of shark, obviously. And I asked the guys, I said, "How often do you catch these things?" They said, "Oh, we caught 3 yesterday. We just throw them back because they're not worth anything." So
that's phenomenal.
It was unbelievable. Awesome. It was an amazing. That was my last Sri Lanka's, or when I was my last trip there, and that was a wild trip. That's again another whole story for another time. But anyway, so Rex was there, which is kind of a lot of sentimental thing for me because I've been corresponding with him and I'd met him before. And then of course Asha was there, and then of course Daniel, whose team was running the Sharks International. And they did a phenomenal job. It was really well done. There's a lot of little bumps there kind of leading up to it, but overall I think everybody had a really good time at the conference. And
I've heard nothing but great things.
Yeah.
Like from people all ages from all around the world, for those who commented, where they just thought it was absolutely amazing that they would go again. Was it 800 people?
Yeah, I kept seeing different numbers, but 800 or 850 people, and from 85. It was 800 people, 85 countries, something like that. Awesome. They kept saying, and it was really good. It was really good. If you're following, I'm going to repost these, but I managed to give a shout out to all of the keynote speakers. We featured all of their podcasts that they'd been on recently, and so I'll be reposting those on my social media as well to catch up with them. So if you didn't make Sharks International, you can go hear their story from a lot of the keynote speakers. I actually didn't catch many talks myself because I was mostly talking with people, seeing like old friends, catching up with people, and then met a lot of young people there. Some of them I knew their names, some of them I didn't, and it was just really kind of cool catching up with them in person.
Yeah. It was. I thought, I find that at those types of conferences where you've been going to them for quite a while, and you've been in the industry for quite some time, like in the field for quite some time, and when you meet up at a conference like this, you're going to meet new people, which is always great. And you're going to catch some sessions that are, going to be like, wow, this is an amazing, you'll look it up and you'll want to go to those. But you tend to miss a lot of the sessions because you're meeting with people that you haven't met with because of geographic distances, or you haven't seen them for whatever it's worth. But also through the podcast too, I assume, we get DMs from people all the time, which is great, by the way, and to see them in person must have been a real treat too. So you're meeting new people that have, they've been listening to the podcast and they're asking questions about so and so, and it's just great to be there. And that's what a lot of these conferences are like, to be able to go see the poster presentations and the sessions and the keynotes. Those are always fun, but as there's always a conference. The problem with conferences is you can't go to all the sessions,
right.
Because they're concurrent, and a lot of the times it's difficult to choose which one. And sometimes, like, I like to go to a lot of the graduate student like poster presentations or even sessions to get to know who's coming up into the field. But a lot of the times it's you're talking to people behind the scenes, and you're just chatting with people, and that's also the fun part of the conferences, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and I say a lot of the people. What really, and again, I was texting you, so you kind of knew this, but just for people out there, I gotta say it was really kind of heartwarming to the number of people that came up to me unsolicited and just said how much they enjoyed the podcast, or they enjoyed watching the documentary on the YouTube. I had people from like countries of Benin, Guinea-Bissau, Ghana.
That's awesome.
Just like, I don't know, I mean, and there's some other countries, places you'd have to go look. I mean, I kind of know where they are because I lived in Africa, but places you just never think about, just come and say, oh, I really enjoy the podcast, Dave, blah, blah, blah. And a few of several of the people, actually, I was kind of like, after talking with them, I go like, great, why don't you come on the podcast? So I'm going to have some more. I got a whole slew of people that I got a chance to catch up with in person and find out, about what they're doing. And, and I think one thing we've done very well at is we've had guests on from, I think, at least 50 countries now, and I've probably picked up at least another half dozen to a dozen people from countries that I had no idea they were listening to us, the podcast. So look forward to that later this year. We'll have some new guests on to share their stories in some of these countries.
I can't wait.
Oh yeah, no, it was amazing. Just the people coming up there and just sharing their stories on where on how much they enjoyed the podcast, and so because it really gives. I know we talked about how we have probably downloads in about 175 countries or so, but when you actually have people from countries you didn't even think about saying how much they enjoy the podcast, they look forward to the new episodes. It's like, wow, that's really for us. It's just really rewarding to hear that type of
100%. And I think also that's one of the major benefits of having a conference in a country like Sri Lanka. It's a lot cheaper, my assumption, from to go from like Thailand and Singapore and Papua New Guinea and to get to Sri Lanka than it is to where it has been in the past, or in other places like in Europe or in North America, which is, it's expensive to not only go there to get there, but it's also expensive when you get there. So going into a country like Sri Lanka, it opens it up to a lot more people that people haven't met before or met each other, just because it's been so expensive. I know International Marine Conservation Congress, we did a congress in Malaysia, like back in 2016, and then they're going back there Or no, I'm not sure. No, it's sorry. It's
Sharks International is going to be.
Sharks International is going there next year.
Yep.
Next in
2030.
4 years.
2030.
2030, which is again, it's great because you're going to get people from those places that get to go another, and it's cheaper to not only be there but also to get there, which is nice. It's more expensive for us, but we can afford it.
Right. Well, the thing is, like, if I take out the airfare, and I was kind of fortunate that I was going to South Africa on the one project, so I had my airfare covered for that part of it, but I didn't have any. I totally self-funded the Sharks International because unfortunately they don't, most groups don't like to fund you to talk. So but because I was in South Africa, it was cheaper for me to go there from an airfare. But if I just took the airfare out of the equation for the hotel and the food, registration, all that, it was cheaper to go to Colombo than it would cost me to go to New Orleans in July for AES.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it was the same. It was the same in 2022 when the Sharks International was in Valencia, Spain, and the AES was at Spokane. It was cheaper for me to go to Valencia than to go to Spokane, Washington, which I'd rather go to Valencia anyway. But it was just to give you an idea on the cost differences to go into, conferences are getting so expensive these days, especially in North America or Europe. It's just, a little sidebar, but it's like they really need to rethink how they're doing these conferences, I think, or they're going to slowly go away because people just, unless you have funding, you just cannot afford to go to them.
It's a tough thing. I mean, especially with the world today, obviously, airplane tickets are more expensive these days around the world. Mm-hmm. We're in an energy crisis at this point. Gas prices went down here, but they were up at that time. They were up. We were closer to $2 a liter, which is equivalent to almost $5 a gallon. U.S. So, it's that could be difficult. You're right, though. You can't just assume that everybody can pay their own way.
Right.
It's actually that usually doesn't happen, and usually people wait on funding, and if they plan it properly and they do maybe some creative accounting near their fiscal year end and beginning, it can help. But I think that's I guess an issue and a challenge for every conference in marine.
Yeah, things like things like the registration are just getting untenable. And it's like, what do you think? Like, what am I paying for with the registration?
Yeah.
I'm sure you could break it down. I could probably give you some ideas, but it's like that's a big hit when you've got the other expenses there, and then there's a lot of emphasis put on student funding, which is great, of course. But when I came up, there was no student funding. If you're going as a student, you funded yourself, and so you'd save up all year just so you could go to the conference. And nowadays they have a lot of student funding opportunities, but then when I go to a conference like this, a lot of the students want to come up, someone like myself, they want to come up and meet me, take pictures and stuff and get and talk with me and stuff. And I'm pretty accessible most of the time, unless I'm giving a talk or something. And I think that's something funding agencies and conferences need to think about is that, some of the senior people here that are either self-funding, even just to help out like on a registration cost would be huge. Especially like later in your career where you're not working, you don't have maybe as many grant funds, and a lot of those things don't fund conferences. It's great if the students are there, but it's like if the students are just talking to other students, they don't get a chance to meet some of the people. When I started out, it was great. I met Eugenie Clark when I was a young student. People like Sonny Gruber, a number of other people that era, and of course Leonard Capagno I talk about all the time. It was great to meet those people like at conferences because you may not and stuff. And it's kind of neat. Looking back now, you get fond memories of thinking like, oh, I remember the first time I met this person or that person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I get a lot of funny stories I could tell at the time. I'll save that for some other time.
But you're right. But I think it goes to when you look at conferences all in all, and this is not Sharks International. We're not picking on it at all. I think it's more of conferences all around. I've been in other I've worked in other industries, like the software engineering and tech engineering, and a lot of times you go to a conference to get specific training. You go to you need a benefit out there, and I'll be honest, like the conferences there are like upwards of $2,000 registration or $1,000 registration. So when you're ready to pay that, you have to justify it to your place of work of, hey, like I need to go to this, or like I need to go this because I'm going to get training on this, or there's a specific software package that I can get training. I think with marine biology, it's a little different because you're like, oh, I have this paper that I want to present because it's really important and I want to be able to go there. We don't really think of it. I've never thought of it when I go there is, what am I going to get out of it? Am I going to get a collaboration out of it? Am I going to learn something new, or there's somebody I want to meet there? Is there going to be like, it's always based on, I got funding, maybe I can go, or my professor has funding, maybe he or she or they will send me to that conference. There's no like question that you're answering, like a training or something that you're saying this is worth it, like with the registration and things like that. And I think it's an interesting question to think of that I haven't thought of personally when I go to marine biology. I'm like, is it fun? Are the people great? Am I going to learn something new? I'm going now as from like when I go to IMCC, I'm going to be in Scotland. I'm going to be going as Pisces Ocean. So, okay, all right, now I'm going for work. So I'm going to be talking to people about maybe doing some collaborations or getting some work from them at some point. And so now it's a little bit different. But when you go as a student, when you go as a professor, like what do you got to ask yourself, like, what are you looking for? You're near the end, towards the end of your career. You've been to these conferences before. You went to the one in Spain. What questions were you asking yourself when you went to this? Like, what were you like? Did you ask yourself, what are you going to try and get out of this conference?
Well, when I had a full lab, and I'd always have like 7-8 students at these conferences presenting, and so I would, there was a big incentive to go because I'd be there to support the students and on. But now that I don't have students here at Moss Landing for the most part, but I do mentor quite a few students, and pretty much some of the ones I mentioned. I mentioned Adriana, Benaya, Julia. They all presented at Sharks International, even though I wasn't directly involved with their particular projects. I was still there to be supportive and everything, and it was kind of cool to see. But a lot of it at this point in time is just to be able to just personal, just to keep contact, keep my finger in that pie with people. Especially, I think this is where it comes into doing things like the podcast that I just mentioned. I mean, it was great hearing feedback from people on the podcast. And then also, like I said, there's a number of young people. I was like, wow, okay, I didn't know you were doing anything in Ghana. I didn't know,
right.
Some people I knew the name, but I didn't really know them at all. And so I had a chance to make those connections. And as I say, stay tuned later this year. You're going to see a number of people that I literally made the connections with there at Sharks International. And I say a lot of because it's such a big conference, a lot of the people that I only see every few years are at this conference. I could run, and most of them have been on the podcast, but it's nice to see them socially and, have a beer or something with them and just kind of catch up on what they're doing on everything. Yeah. So it's in a way, it's a bit of professional development, but it's also just kind of a little bit social. And this year I did present, which I hadn't done in a few years. Gave an actual presentation, short presentation, on a guitarfish stuff we're working with. And most of the co-authors are younger people, late 20s, 30ish or so. And as you and I talked off air, it's kind of funny if you saw any of my posts on Instagram, or if you were there, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I asked my first question. I popped up a picture of a well-known guitarist, and I asked if anybody out there in the audience that was not named Rachel Aitchison knows who's under 40, who has ever heard of Eddie Van Halen, and just crickets. Nobody had a freaking clue. And I said, you guys know Van Halen? Anybody? No, just nothing. Crickets. Never heard of them. Never heard anything.
So funny.
So you really feel like old then, as far as life goes. But anyway, it was a fun talk, and that was actually kind of just a quick story. I'll probably talk about this more in a separate episode. But I when I first went to South Africa 40 years ago, Leonard Campagna sent me out off to go to a place called Bird Island off the South African coast to look for a guitarfish. that nobody at that time nobody had seen in like 60 years or so. And so I literally, like about 6 weeks after I arrived, I was standing out in a field near a place called Bushman's River, waiting for a South African Defense Force helicopter to come pick me up. And it was my first helicopter ride. And we went out, we cruised along the coast. The guys were a couple of young guys about my age at the time. They said, "Hey, you want to go look for some sharks?" And so we cruised along the coast. The first time I got to see sharks from a helicopter, and that's pretty cool. That was pretty cool. And
yeah.
Anyway, we went up to Bird Island to start this journey. Anyway, the short story was that was 40 years ago, and after 40 years, I finally found this guitarfish. Nobody'd seen it for like literally 100 years. And in this paper I've been working on with these young people, we found this guitarfish. It had not been seen for literally 100 years.
That's amazing.
And so that's a whole story in itself. And I talked about that in my presentation, about focus a little bit on that, just because here's persistence and trying to see if you can find a shark that, or in this case, a flat shark nobody's seen. So that was kind of a cool story. And again, it was nice because I had people coming up, that weren't even born, they weren't even in the planning stages, I'm sure, at that point, because they weren't born till the late 90s, telling how much they enjoyed hearing that story about this stuff. And
love it.
Then I just
That's cool, man.
Yeah, so it was kind of cool on that whole thing.
Now, let me ask you this. We're kind of coming to the end of time here, and I know you and I could talk about this forever, and we have talked about it quite a bit. We will after this recording. But, when we had Daniel Ferreira on, we asked him, like, hey, like, what's the point? What's the mission of this conference? And I think the mission was not just to talk about shark science, but also around the people that are around these sharks, that, in the villages and in the towns and in the cities along the coastal areas. And, to really tell those stories and to really look at, from a science perspective, how, science can really help coastal people, whether they're fishing villages, whether they're tourism villages, or whether just villages that have something different, or towns and cities that have something different. With your experience of going there, do you find that a lot of the sessions, do you find that a lot of people were talking about this type of thing in terms of working with people? Because normally the sharks are the hero. In this case, it seemed like the point that Daniel was trying to say was that the people are the hero, and how we can help them.
Where the field's gone, and I can speak this now, with actually over 40 years experience in this thing, you see, and I talked a little bit about the science communication or lack of it before. If I had to say, one of the takeaways was a huge emphasis on science communication. I'd say less hard science and more science communication.
Right.
Storytelling, that type of stuff really seemed to be kind of at the core of a lot of the presentations. I mean, they're doing science, but there's a huge push on the science communication aspect of it. That seems to be really a big emphasis on a lot of the stuff, which has been a change. For me, it's at this point seeing this trajectory from where we were, where there wasn't anything called shark conservation, to now is shark conservation a big aspect of it. The whole science communication is becoming what has become a whole area that a lot of people talk about in terms of with their presentations. And so it's still kind of in a burgeoning stage, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes in terms of the science and stuff, as far as where it went. And so you saw a lot of that. A lot of the presentations really focused and hit a lot on the communication aspect of it.
Yeah, interesting.
So yes, that was a real thing, and I'll talk more about that like off air and stuff. But it was just as kind of interesting for me being around this long and then seeing young people that all they know is science communication. That's really what they're at.
Yeah.
And they're doing less, and I'm not trying to diminish anything, but they're doing less of what I'd call the hard science and more having the storytelling, science communication. Again, there's certainly a need for that to communicate with people. But I still think a thing that a lot of people are missing is you need to communicate with the average person and the non-science person. You don't need to demean them. You don't need to talk down to them. You just need to come up. And this is where I go back to John McCosker decades ago. Communicate with them in an intelligent, but just a non-jargon way.
Yeah.
And you can do that. And if you can do that, you're gonna be way ahead of the game.
Kind of like you're talking to your friends or your family and explaining what you do and things like that, right?
In simple terms.
The interesting thing about this, and you're right, there's a lot of more storytelling going on, especially from younger people who are using the technologies that we have in social media and really, growing up on it and using it to the thing. Here's the thing that we're at, in my opinion, with my history of storytelling and as well as science. Funding either happens one or the other. The scientist is not incentivized to do science communication because they're not necessarily getting paid for science communication. They're getting paid to do the science, and vice versa. And I think what happens is we get a lot of people like Christian Parsons and others who have done a great job in communicating science, but they can't go to find, because it's a lot of times because they can't find a science job, so I think if we can marry the two together, labs and nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations can marry those two together and fund both, which we're starting to see it a little bit more. But I feel like we need to see that a little bit more so that we incentivize our scientists to be able to speak about the science that they're doing, to make it part of their jobs and not just an extra. I think, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. No, I do see what you're saying. A thing that I see, and I know some people get really upset about this, especially people that are really good in the social communication, is that there was a study done about 10, 12 years ago, but where the guy developed a thing called the K index, which stands for the Kardashian index. I think you and I have talked about it. And it really is true. And I see this where you see people that do really good. They're really good on the social communication, but I certainly wouldn't put them in a different category as, say, some people that are really top science. I mean, really doing some great work. And but they don't have, because it takes a lot of time to do science communication. And then you see people that are doing the science, they don't have the time for that, and the people that are good to science communication don't really have the time for doing a lot of the science stuff. And
this is where I think it needs to be married together. Where you're right, I don't think everybody should be doing both, but at least in each lab there should be a science communication person. In each nonprofit there should be a division of science communication, and which you're seeing a lot more of in the nonprofit sector. They're hiring more, and they're well-paid jobs for a lot of them, that are like a lot of the bigger organizations. But you're right, because like the scientist who's doing amazing science may not have the ability to communicate that. So a science communicator can come in, understand what it's all about, and then be able to communicate it to that audience that they want to communicate to. So I think there's really good. There's definitely value in having both on your team.
Yeah, and I think the one thing, like, because people say like, well, you do science communication now, Dave, and I says, well, yeah, but I've had like a 45-year career where I did stuff, and the science communication I've just started doing. That's why I want to do some of these. That's one of the things that I'm doing these things, like with this documentary series, Searching for Lost Sharks, Extinct or Alive. Go check it out on YouTube. I can tell the story, like how shark conservation came about, because I lived it. I was there. I mean, a younger person, like half my age, doesn't have that frame of reference. In 30 years, they will. But But I have that frame of reference, and so I try to tell those stories, as you know, to share, to kind of put, so people have a bit of a history on where we've come from. They know where we're at, but then they can like hopefully look to the future.
Yeah. Exactly. I completely agree.
That's where it goes.
I think we could do an entire episode on this, and maybe we should get a guest that does science communication and science as well to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of doing it and where the field is going. Because I think you're right. I think we're in a very interesting age of science and getting out to beyond the choir, beyond the conferences, and how do we get into the homes of people and be able to do that?
How do you make use of these technologies? Again, they're and I think you need to talk to. Anyways, that's all. That should be something we should try to do. Have a story on. One thing before we go, I just got to share with everybody is after Sri Lanka at the end of the conference there, I had to go tick off one of my lifetime bucket list things, and I went down to the Maldives with a group of students from the Delvey lab. Rachel Aitchison, who was from former student of mine, Amanda Arnold, and Jay. I forget Jay's last name off the top, and his girlfriend stuff. But we had Jancis, and we had an awesome time. I got to go diving, which was kind of, again, water's about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was terrible, horrible. And they kept saying, well, this was really the locals there kept saying, well, this really isn't the best time of year to go there. The one thing, and people who follow the podcast know this is my thing, is I was really hoping to see the whale sharks there.
Did it happen?
No, but I was pulling up pictures from other people that went to different islands from the conference.
No.
Pilar Blanco, damn it. And they're showing these pictures of these freaking whale sharks they're diving with. And I was like, damn it. I'm on the wrong island. Damn. So
these evasive one day we're gonna have to do it, Dave. One day we're gonna have to go like specifically just for whale sharks. Like,
yes. We'll have to do that.
Go down to maybe like Mexico or something and just be like during the right time of year and just go.
Yeah, but I will say, finally, I just say, like, it was great. Rachel, Amanda, Jay, Jancis, amazing time. Great, having a good time. I couldn't have asked for a better first experience in the Maldives. And so it was definitely a lifetime bucket list for me. So anyway, thanks a lot for the time here and everyone. And
Thank you for all the adventures, man. Like doing this is tiring for anybody.
Yeah.
And so it's nice for you to be able to tell us about these adventures and the tips that you provide. It's always great. So thanks a lot, Dave. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next episode.
Yep, we'll do.